Hello, this is a video introduction for our just released TUKRA sequencer. TUKRA is an 8-track trigger sequencer, drum synth and sample player with a huge amount of internal and external modulation via both CV and MIDI. At a first glance, TUKRA may seem a little bit complex with all these symbols and only buttons and an encoder to control everything. But worry not, because the second you get the overall structure of the module, it becomes simple and immediately accessible. So let's go step by step and have a look at the overall structure of the module. We first have an encoder, followed by the main function buttons, then the 8x8 button grid, a column of reference LEDs, and then of course the inputs and outputs. So the encoder has two modes that we can change by clicking on it. One is track selection and the other one is changing the value of whatever you've selected with the buttons. For example, I'm now in the audio mixer. I can click on any parameter and turn the encoder to change its value. If I click the encoder, the reference LEDs change color to pink and I can change the track selection. Next, we have the main function buttons. The first column are edit buttons or tools, such as play and stop, tempo change, zoom, randomize or initialize, copy-paste, multi-selection, and a control and shift buttons. The second column are the different edit modes and views of TUKRA. The first 4 buttons relate to TUKRA as a trigger sequencer. We have the step editor, gate editor, roll, and step value, which assigns a number to each step that you can later use to modulate parameters within the sequencer. If you use Shift in combination with the top 3 buttons, you'll access the probability settings for step, gate, and roll. Note that when we change between these 4 editing modes, what we see in the 8x8 button matrix is the current pattern being played, with color differences depending on what is it that we are editing. So when we use these 4 modes, we can completely ignore the symbols on the matrix, and you can see how simple and hands-on TUKRA is when editing patterns. The symbols of the 8x8 button grid are relevant for the last 4 main buttons. These views relate to the audio and overall performance aspect of the module. They are the track settings, live view, drum synth and sample player, and finally the audio mixer. As I was saying, the grid symbols are now relevant, because each view is really a menu, whose elements are the symbols to the right of it. So the audio mixer is row number 8, the drum synth and sample player is row number 7, and so on and so forth. If you look at the column with the reference LEDs, you'll see how when we change in between these 4 views, there's a blinking LED showing in which menu we're in. This doesn't happen when we're in the first 4 modes editing the patterns, because the grid symbols aren't used here. We'll do an in-depth video manual of every single feature of TUKRA, but for now let's have a quick look at some parameters of these menus. Let's start with track settings. The symbols in row number 5 are the contents of this menu. Here we can enable or disable the drum synth and sample player, change the sample selection, and we have a couple of extra options for MIDI and modulation. The way these 4 menus work is that we have tracks 1 to 8 laid out vertically, in the same way that we had when editing steps. Track 1 on the top, then track 2, 3, top to bottom. As I just said, since we're in track settings, the symbols of row number 5 will tell us the meaning of each column. For example, the second column enables or disables the drum synth for each track, and the third column does the same thing for the sample player. Now, both are disabled, and if I start clicking on the first 2 columns, we'll start hearing how each track starts producing sound, depending on what is activated. Live view works in the same way. Tracks are laid out top to bottom, and each column is a different element of the menu. Here we can solo, mute, play rolls, flip patterns, invert their direction, and rotate them. Next, we have the drum synth and sample player settings. Here we can change the volume for the synth and the samples, control envelopes, pitch, and add noise. The layout is the same as before, but since we have this mixer view, we have to select the track with the first column. We don't see the 8 tracks at once. Finally, we have the audio mixer. The layout is identical to the previous menu, but we have different elements: general volume, balance, reverb amount, filter frequency, resonance and type, and a bit crusher. If we stop here for a second, you can already have a pretty decent mapping of the module. On the left, we have the edit buttons, then 4 modes for editing the sequences, and finally 4 views where you can control more global aspects of TUKRA's performance. That leaves us with the upper part of the 8x8 grid. And as you might have noticed, we've run out of main function buttons. So how do we access the remaining 32 symbols? By using the atom in combination with the buttons of the 8x8 grid. These symbols are laid out so that the functions on each row are more or less related. Some of these functions change what we see in a similar way as the 4 bottom menus did, and some of them don't. That totally depends on the function. On row number 1, you'll find the configuration of songs, parts and patterns, and save and load projects. Row number 2 has different settings like clock in and out, brightness, reverb, and also tap tempo, record and snapshots. Next is row 3, ramifications. This is TUKRA's most advanced feature, so I won't go into details about it now. I'll just say that with ramifications, you can control generative algorithms that will change some behaviors of TUKRA over time. With this tool, basically you can start up with very basic rhythms and create deep and coherent evolution out of them. And last but definitely not least, we have the pattern settings on row 4. These include pattern direction, pattern length, clock divider, Euclidean number and rotation, probability sculpt, and a master filter that works on the whole sequencer. So this is it. I hope you liked this quick view of TUKRA's layout. If you're here because you acquired one, thank you so much for doing so. And if you're thinking of getting one, I hope this video helped clearing out any doubts you might have had. As I've mentioned, we'll release a video manual in which we'll go over every detail. But if you have any question, please contact us through our social media profiles or via our webpage, tesseractmodular.com. Thanks for watching. Bye.